So good to see you all here tonight, and welcome. I'm John Hart, Vice President for Academic Affairs and Dean of the Faculty here at the college, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this event tonight, this debate between two of our Democratic candidates for the North Carolina 11th Congressional District. You may wish to return at the same time on Monday evening for a debate among Republican candidates. For those of you who are part of our campus, faculty, staff, and students, thank you for coming to participate in this important electoral process. For the many of you who often attend events on our campus, such as the many fine arts events and our athletic competitions, I welcome you back again. And I suspect we may have a few visitors to our campus for the first time. I especially welcome you and hope you will return often. Brevard College has as its motto, learn in order to serve. We invite, we even encourage students to step in and stand out. We thus encourage our students to find places for achievement and contribution across the campus, in their academic majors, in clubs and organizations, through involvement with activities such as athletics, and in their associations with fellow students and faculty. We do this because we believe such activity is an important vehicle for learning, but also to inspire them to contribute here as well as in the larger community. We want them to make our campus and our community better through their own community involvement and service, both on and off campus. Tonight's event showcases then what we expect of our students, as this event is co-sponsored by two such student organizations, two of the many we have on our campus, represented by the two banners behind me. This event is co-sponsored by the Debate Society and the Brevard College chapter of Young Politicians of America. I want to thank the members of both of these organizations for organizing and planning this event. I want to especially recognize the contributions of Ms. Elise Labus, who currently serves as president of both of these organizations. Elise is a junior from Dunwoody, Georgia, near Atlanta, and is an exercise science major with a minor in pre-law. After graduation, she plans to attend law school. So again, let me step aside, welcome you again, thanks for coming. I will now ask Ms. Labus to come forward to introduce our lead moderator for the evening. Welcome.
Thank you, Dean Hart. Many of my fellow students worked diligently and tirelessly in preparing for tonight's event, and will continue to contribute their time as we prepare for Monday's debate. Please recognize these individuals, our colleagues who have devoted their time as they stand. Chantel Azevedo is actually currently assisting me in the wings. Blake Wall, Charisma Sellers, and Rachel Barrow. Thank you. Also, I am grateful for the assistance and expertise of the Brevard College Communications Director, Ms. Wendy Jones, as well as Dr. John Paget and Pat Shores, and other members of the staff and faculty who have assisted us. We are especially appreciative for the music presented by the Brevard College Jazz Ensemble and its members, Mike Oliver, Carter Stevens, and Zach Douglas. Thank you. Now, the lead moderator for tonight needs no introduction. Darcel Grimes has been a staple, a television presence for almost 30 years, whom we continue to welcome as students in our dorm rooms, and whom Western Carolina families invite every evening into their living rooms as anchor of News 13 WLOS. She serves as a model, especially for me, as a woman, but to all of us, for her ethical standards and professionalism. She can be described as a person who followed a dream, taking her from her home in Washington, D.C., to Mississippi, to Asheville. And in those years, as anchor and reporter, she has produced award-winning reports, such as her healthcare series. She's appeared on ABC's Good Morning America, covered a political convention, a presidential inauguration, the visits of Prince Charles, President Barack Obama, and Vice Presidential candidate Sarah Palin. Along with her media responsibilities, Ms. Grimes gives of her time and her talents to raise money for charities and special causes, and of course, to help raise awareness and benefit the people of Western North Carolina by participating in events such as this. I might add that Ms. Grimes is here this evening after having anchored the 6 p.m. news on WLOS. And immediately following this debate, Ms. Grimes will leave our campus, drive back to Asheville in time to anchor the 10 o'clock news 13 on My 40 and the 11 o'clock newscast on News 13 WLOS. We will be watching. For her achievements, for her service, and her sacrifice tonight, the Brevard College Debate Society and YPA, Young Politicians of America, are grateful. Please welcome our lead moderator, Ms. Darcel Grimes.
Thank you hardly seems enough. And yes, I will be going back, and I will not be speeding. Scout's honor. Thank you, Elise, for that wonderful introduction. And I, too, want to welcome all of you this evening to this debate at the Brevard College. Before I speak to the rules of the debate, let's introduce the members of our panel. First, we have Mr. Jim Buchanan of the Asheville Citizen-Times. Mr. Buchanan, a graduate of Western Carolina University, is an award-winning columnist and editorial writer. He has worked in Asheville since 1987 and has served on the Citizen-Times editorial board for 16 years. Since 2008, Mr. Buchanan has been the newspaper's editorial page editor. Our second panelist is Ms. Mary Ann Enlow, representing the Waynesville Mountaineer. Ms. Enlow is a former mayor for the town of Hazelwood and a former Haywood County commissioner. So she knows well about being in the political spotlight as a candidate. Ms. Enlow covers government and politics for both the Mountaineer and the Biltmore Beacon. And by the way, Ms. Enlow, her mother and daughter all attended Brevard College. Our third panelist is Mr. John Lanier, editor of the Transylvania Times. Mr. Lanier is a 30-year resident of Transylvania County. He is a former teacher and is currently completing his 5th year as editor of the Transylvania Times. In 2011, Mr. Lanier was awarded first honors for editorial writing by the North Carolina Press Association. Please welcome all of our panelists for tonight's debate, and if we can have one more round of applause for them. Now, as most of you know, this debate is scheduled for 90 minutes. But if we determine that the questions from the panelists have been exhausted and that continuing the debate will have no practical benefits, we will bring the debate to a close earlier. Hopefully, that will not be the case. The panelists will alternate in their questioning of the debate, of the candidates. Panelists can direct their questions to one or both candidates. The candidates will have 2 minutes to respond to the question. If a candidate chooses, he will be allowed 1 minute of rebuttal. Elise Labus and Chantel Azevedo will serve as our timekeepers. I will make sure, or try to make sure, that the candidates, who are politicians, remember, observe the time limits. I also reserve the right to ask questions as well as follow-up questions to clarify points made by the candidates and to keep their responses on track. Not that they would not be on track. The panelists are also free to ask follow-up questions. Now, these rules have been discussed with the candidates prior to tonight's event. To keep this debate fair, we ask you as members of the audience to show respect for the informative value of this event. And by doing that, we're asking that you withhold applause or other sounds of approval or disapproval until the conclusion of this debate. Now please welcome 2 of the Democratic candidates vying for their party's nomination in the 11th District Congressional race. Mr. Cecil Bothwell. Mr. Tom Hill. The candidates have 5 minutes to present opening statements. Now, by a coin toss, Mr. Tom Hill will speak first. Mr. Hill, you have your 5 minutes.
Thank you. I want to say that it's a great crowd, great place for a debate, and I appreciate the people's effort to make this possible. I do need to make one correction about Ms. Grimes' opening statement there. I am not a politician. It's the first time I have ever run for office. Well, I ran for student body president in high school, but I suppose that counts. So I'm not a politician, but I guess as this campaign goes on, you might brand me as such. I want to give you a few numbers to start this debate. First number is $19 billion. That's the amount in profit made by ExxonMobil in 2009. $0. That's how much they paid in income tax. In fact, they got a check from the U.S. Treasury for $140 million, 140 plus. Here's another number, $12 billion. That's how much General Electric made in profit the same year. Income tax, 0. And their CEO, Jeff Immelt, is exported more jobs overseas than any other corporation. And Obama has made him the job czar. There seems to be some irony there. Here's another number, $19 billion again. That's the amount of profit made by AIG in the last quarter. No surprise here, 0 income tax. That's what they'll pay. And I said the last quarter, not the last year. And the reason is that we bailed them out, and when taxpayers bailed them out a couple of years ago, legislation was passed that basically exempted them from paying tax on this income. So there you have it. These are not isolated cases. In 1960, under President Dwight Eisenhower, corporations paid approximately 20% of the U.S. tax burden. Now they pay less than 5%, and they're screaming about that as how unfair it is. If they so choose, these large corporations can move offshore to places like the Cayman Islands, set up a single office with a secretary there, designate that as their corporate headquarters, and pay no U.S. taxes. And that's one of the things that's wrong with this country. Rich hedge fund managers on Wall Street pay a maximum rate of 15%, while working people pay a top rate of more than 30%. The top 400 wage earners in the U.S. pay an average of 18%. Some billionaires pay less than 1% of their income in taxes, and more than 1,400 millionaires pay no taxes. Paid no tax in U.S. income tax whatsoever in 2009. The working class pays 15.3% of their pay, half by the employer and half by the employee, and that was just reduced, as most of you know, by 2% for each. And it's deducted for medical care and Social Security, which Congress has spent as incoming revenue and is trying now to renege on paying. The poor pay almost all of their income on necessities, and they're taxed to the hilt. Social Security Trust Fund has a $2.6 trillion surplus, and the geniuses in Washington are crying the fund is in trouble. Corporations are also the ones pushing the Mideast wars under the guise of patriotism and the war on terror, but the real reasons are money and oil, and they refuse to pay any part of the cost. Why are we building infrastructures in Iraq and Afghanistan while our own is crumbling? The answer is non-competing contracts and poorly scrutinized profits. Our troops have not come home. They remain poised in Kuwait and other locations for the inevitable outbreaks that will come. 2/3 of the people in this country want the wars ended, and 2/3 want corporations and rich people to pay their fair share of taxes. But Congress, nothing is being done because Congress has been bought out. That's why I'm running this race. I'm ticked off. If you're expecting to hear a pabulum speech from me about party unity, cover your ears, because that's not what's coming. The war should be ended now. U.S. corporations and rich people should pay a realistic tax rate, and corporations which move offshore should be surcharged with a tariff on their goods and services like the ones imposed by Richard Nixon in the early 1970s. I have passed out a card that has my name and what I stand for, the legislation on it. On one side and on the back is a brief summary of my background, and I hope you'll look at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hill. Mr. Bothwell, you have 5 minutes for your opening comments.
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Grimes, for taking time out of your very busy schedule to be here, and to Mr. Buchanan, Ms. Henlow, and Mr. Lanier. This, to me, is really important that we have debates in front of large audiences, and thank all of you for being here. This is where you get answers from candidates that can't be contradicted later, because a lot of people heard the same answers from the candidates. I also want to stick in here that I want to thank the trio, the jazz trio that played earlier. That was terrific. That was a really nice way to be welcomed to a really beautiful space. And thanks to Dean Hart for welcoming us, and to both clubs, the Young Politicians and the debate team, for helping to make this happen. It is very important, and there'll be more debates, fortunately. There are at least 5, I think 5 more now, 4 or 5 more scheduled. And Mr. Hill and I plan to be there. What I want to tell you in this introduction is a little bit about who I am and where I come from. My concern running for office is for the people of the district, and for the people, in my case, I'm the only elected official running here on the city council in Asheville. And I did that to try to speak up for the people when I thought too often they were being ignored in the city. And that's what I'll continue to do when I'm in Washington. One of the things I've heard about the people in this district, and all of you have heard it too, probably from Channel 13 and from the Citizen Times, and maybe, I don't know the other papers for sure, we're 3rd in the country in hunger in this region. That's not a very good record to have. That means there's a lot of parents that don't have food on the table for their kids in the morning before they go to school. It means they don't know what they're going to feed their kids at night. It means that our food pantries are emptying out. So I talked to the people in my campaign and asked all of them, do you think we should do something about this? No offense meant at all to the evening news, but a 30-second ad on the WLOS News, if you want guaranteed 30 seconds, is about $1,000. So I put it to my campaign. I said, maybe we should turn $1,000 toward the food banks in this region. And I sent it out to our 14,000 people on our email list, and overwhelmingly they said, yes, let's do it. And so we've sent $200 checks to 5 different food banks in the hardest hit counties out here. That's the way I believe government should be responsible to people. I've challenged all of the other candidates in every race, from the county commissions to the state house to Congress, to do the same thing in this district. Let's spend some money where it really does some good. That's the kind of attitude I bring to my race for Congress. I'm the only candidate in either party in this race who has promised to take no money from corporations or corporate PACs. I am not for sale. Government should not be for sale. I will not have strings tied to my arms when I get to Washington, raising my hand to vote for what the lobbyists want. That's a big part of the gridlock we see in Washington, is that they get elected by the people, but the campaigns are paid for by big money donors. And when they get to Washington, they have dinners with the big money lobbyists, and they vote against your interests. I will never vote, ever. I will never compromise when it comes to the interests of the people of this district. Representatives are there to represent the people, not to represent the big money. Like Bernie Sanders, I will never have a meeting behind closed doors with lobbyists. Oh, I'll meet with them because businesses and lobbying companies deserve to meet with elected representatives, but it'll be in public, and the press will be invited. Discussions will occur in public, as they do in our city council meetings in Asheville. Finally, I probably should mention this, and that is that there's been a lot of stink lately from the Republican Party about women's health and their reproductive choices. And what I've made very clear on my website and spoken about everywhere I go is men should take care of their own responsibility concerning reproduction and then sit down and shut up. Women deserve to control their bodies. They deserve to have their health be between them and their healthcare provider. And men really don't have a say in that decision. Thank you very much for being here. I'm looking forward to some hard and fast questions from the panel.
Thank you both. Now the panelists will begin the questioning process. Mr. Buchanan, the first question goes to you.
Thank you, Darcel. And I'll extend my thanks to Brevard College as well, and for the, obviously, a lot of hard work that the kids did. And thanks to Mr. Bothwell and Mr. Hill for seeking public service. It is a noble calling. Gets a little messy in practice sometimes, but it is a good aspiration. I'll ask about the hot topic of the day being discussed around tables and in the political realm, gas prices. They're high, they're stressing family budgets. What would you do in the short term about the current high gas prices, and how would you address the issue in the long term by your energy policy?
Is that to both of us?
You can direct it to whichever one or both.
Since Mr. Hill spoke first, I'll go with Mr. Bothwell.
Okay. I really don't believe there's anything that can be done immediately to drop gas prices, no matter what Newt Gingrich tells you. In fact, what's going on, as far as I can see, is two things. The Republican presidential candidates are threatening war with Iran, and as a result, speculators are driving up the price of gas, the price of oil. In the United States, demand has fallen, and we're actually exporting gasoline. So there's nothing in the market forces that indicates prices should go up. It's fear of what a war with Iran would do to oil that's driving up futures prices. And I think it's intentional, frankly. I really do. I think it's one way they hope to put Obama out of office next fall. Long term, we need alternatives. Today I spent a couple of hours at the Land of Sky Regional Council with the Plug-in Electric Vehicle Coalition, talking about how we're turning Western North Carolina into a premier place for electric vehicles. We're beginning to have more. In fact, we have more than any other district, any other region in the state right now, getting ready for those electric vehicles. We only have about 30 on the road out here now, but in a couple of years we'll have 2,000. And in 10 years after that, we'll have 20 or 30,000. And we're going to be ready for that demand when it hits. In Asheville, we're building parking garages that have electric chargers in them. We have solar electric chargers going up around the region. That's the way we're going to get cars off of gas. About $1 of every gallon you buy goes out of the region completely. We can keep that money here by generating solar power and charging the cars with solar. Now, that's not an immediate fix, and I think anybody who promises you an immediate fix is offering pie in the sky.
How much time am I given?
Yes.
How much time?
You can have 2 minutes to answer the
2
same
minutes.
question.
81% of all trades involving oil are taken by investors who do not take delivery of oil. There's some very simple solutions to this problem that will help immediately. One is for the president to issue an executive order that stops these traders from buying oil unless they take delivery. That's very simple. The second is that the Commodities Future Trading Commission has the authority to implement this very approach that I've said. They were supposed to have it in place in January of 2011. And here it is more than a year later, and it's not in place. And the reason it's not in place is that the rich traders are blocking it through by having their lawyers challenge every aspect of the proposed regulations. They need just to do it. Bernie Sanders sent them a letter and said, you're supposed to do this. Why haven't you done it? They haven't done it. That is the root right now of the high price oil. Now, on a long-term basis, I agree with Cecil, it's not an easy solution. But I would point out to you there are right now more than 100 nuclear reactors in this country. People talk about let's end nuclear, let's do this and let's do that. There are more than 100 right now, and there are going to be more. And what we need to do is to build facilities to dispose of the nuclear waste. And I can tell you how to do that. We can transmute, we now have the technology to transmute those actinides into inert elements, and we should be doing that. And we're not. We sit on our hands and we don't do anything until it's too late. Thank you.
Follow up. Ms. Enlow?
Thank you. Can you hear me? No. All right. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be back at my alma mater. It's wonderful to see this many people out here. Thank you again for those of you who have worked so hard to put this together. For Ralph Hanley, who is an old friend of mine. Thank you, Ms. Grimes, for being here with us this evening when you are so very busy. I'd like to address this to both of you, and I will start with Mr. Bothwell. This week, the Republican members of the House rolled out their version of a budget, and in that version, it would change drastically Medicare as our seniors understand it today. What 3 steps would you support for to address Medicare issues?
There are 3 fairly simple steps that we can use to solve any financial problem with Medicare. The first and easiest, which Congress could do anytime they've got the gumption of, is to remove the cap. Like Social Security, Medicare payments are capped at around $110,000. It's in that range. I don't know the exact number right now. But we can raise the cap so that people who make more than that $110,000 continue to pay in up to some higher level. And we could talk about what higher level that might be. There we're solvent at that point. The second thing we can do is something that the Obama administration has already started doing out west. They're testing it in one region right now. Currently, Medicare pays by procedure. That is, for every procedure that a doctor bills, he gets a portion of the money. And it's got 2 roots. One is the insurance companies don't like malpractice, so they want the doctors to do all they can. And the other is that doctors don't get reimbursed very well, so they may add procedures to get more reimbursement. What they're testing is a system that pays for outcome. The doctor gets paid if you get well, not if he does a lot of procedures. And they found that it's saving money already out there. Doctors are doing fewer procedures, and patients are getting well faster. The third thing is something that Howard Dean presented when he was running for president in 2004. We need to have a real serious conversation about the final days of people's lives. I'm not talking about death panels, I'm talking about making real decisions about how long we want to extend life support for ourselves. Make our own decisions about that. I'm not talking about anybody else dictating it, but we spend an inordinate amount of money in the end days of people's lives, and we don't need to do that. We could be kinder. Thank you.
Yes. I would like to say that let's make a distinction between Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. Social Security has a surplus of $2.6 trillion, and the Republicans try to lump it all together as one big entitlement bag and attack Social Security as well as Medicare. Medicare is funded by about 2% paid by a little less than 2% paid by the employee and 2% by the employer. And it is, give or take, solvent as long as we have a reasonably balanced budget. When you don't have a balanced budget, when the taxes aren't coming in, that 1 3/4% is not enough to pay Medicare, it's that simple. Medicaid, on the other hand, is really charity. Just telling it like it is, all right? Now, and we're having to take that also out of the budget. Now, my position is this: not one penny to cut from Social Security, not one penny to be cut from Medicare, but I would support allowing the Part D Medicare to be, allowing the government to negotiate with the drug companies for Part D. That was a Bush specialty, where they forbid the government to negotiate with these guys. And so that needs to be fixed. And as far as Medicaid, we're going to have the rich pay their part of these taxes so that we can support these people. Now, one other thing I want to say about, I have a sister who's living in an assisted living facility. And when you walk in there, the one thing they all say, I want to go home. I want to go home. I want to go home. Just over and over and over again. And we should establish a program that treats people like that in their homes in the latter stages of their lives, as Cecil was referring to.
Since we're talking health issues, I have one quick question that I would like to direct to Mr. Hill.
Yes.
Mr. Bothwell made very clear in his opening statement his position on women's health and reproductive choices. Do you agree with what he said?
Not completely. I think that I oppose using abortion as a form of birth control. I do not want my views to be forced on other people. I oppose abortion except in cases of incest, rape, mother's life in danger, a fetus that's badly deformed. But if people want to do this on their own, I will not tolerate any law that forbids them to do that. If one wants to have an abortion, what I will oppose is the use of taxpayer funds to perform abortions, okay, except in these limited cases. And I think that's what, I think it's not correct to force people to pay taxes for those procedures because so many people, it's a fighting issue and they are so strongly opposed. But what people do, this is still a free country. It's the same way I feel about homosexuality. If people want to live that lifestyle, it's a free country and they can do that. But don't ask the state to put a stamp of approval on it. That's my position. And I realize it's very unpopular in this audience, but that's my position.
What about when it comes to contraceptives?
Contraceptives, absolutely. I think I can't imagine that anybody would object to it. Now, if you want to make the Catholics pay for it, then you've got a problem again, all right? But as far as if anybody wants to use contraceptives and they have a health insurance program that supports that, it is clearly the right way to go. People that are so opposed to abortion should be the first to step up and support contraception. I don't know if I answered the question or not, but that's my best shot.
May I read that?
Yes, you may.
That's a minute I get, right?
1 minute.
Okay. I strongly disagree on 2 points that Mr. Hill just made. The first is I think it's very worthwhile for taxpayers to provide abortions when necessary. I don't like it as the method of choice for birth control, but you got to look at the whole picture. As unwanted children diminished after Roe v. Wade, there were fewer and fewer unwanted children in America. The crime rate dropped 17 years after that in state after state. And it's because unwanted children are not happy children. And there's no reason to force a woman who's accidentally gotten pregnant to carry a baby to term if it's not fitting in her life right then. I'm also the only candidate in the 11th District in either party who is against Amendment 1. We've got to defeat that one. Thank you.
Just a slight correction, Mr. Bothwell is not the only one against Amendment number 1. One of the Republican candidates, Chris Petrella, I think, stated in today's newspaper that he's also opposing to Amendment 1.
Thank you. I haven't met him in a debate yet.
I haven't met him either, but
I appreciate the correction.
I read his news.
So you got a Republican and a Democrat. Hey, that's pretty
Yeah,
good.
good company.
Mr. Lanier?
I too would like to thank everyone for being here this evening and the college for putting this on. My question is directed to both candidates. What is your position on immigration reform?
Who do you want first?
I guess Mr. Bothwell.
Yeah, I think you were first last time. Immigration reform is one of those wedge issues that the Republicans love to ram in between any kind of interest street they can. The truth is, America needs immigrant workers. There's no way around that. Even in these bad times when we've had high unemployment, farmers in our region even have found it impossible to get workers in their fields because of, especially say Henderson County, where the sheriff was imposing fairly draconian enforcement of ICE rules. Immigrant workers were afraid to come into Henderson County, and apples rotted on the trees. Down in Vidalia, Georgia, onions rotted in the fields. Up in the Midwest, berry bushes went unpicked. And the Vidalia, Georgia, one Vidalia, Georgia farmer said that he tried hiring people from a local temp agency, day labor, and they didn't last half a day. There are people who are experts at farm work, and a lot of them happen to be immigrants. Now, the immigration problem is actually caused by our trade laws. We made big mistakes passing NAFTA and CAFTA and other trade laws since then that didn't include worker protection and environmental protection. Then we came along and we dumped cheap corn like mad on Mexico, putting farmers there out of business and leaving farm workers out of work. And they came here to work on the farms. We also managed to scare away our textile trade, which went to countries that didn't have strong environmental or labor laws. The furniture companies in Western North Carolina went to China directly. North Carolina's lost more workers there than and I'm getting into labor issues here, but we need immigrant workers. That's why they find jobs here. The problem is we've created a black market in labor. We need to get green cards into people's hands and streamline the path to citizenship.
There's not a lot of difference in our positions, main one being that I grew up on a farm, and I came back here in 1987 and took care of my mother's apple orchard for a year, and the only people I could get to do the work were Hispanic laborers. And they worked, the ones that I met are generally good people, they're hardworking. You hear all of this nonsense from hate groups that want to be vigilantes and patrol the borders and run out these non-Americans. Heck, we've all got some skeleton in our closet where we've immigrated, okay? There's probably one ancestor for everybody in this room that got into this country by some surreptitious means. And so, and in fact, if they got in totally legally, all they had to do was to come into Ellis Island and process through. I mean, so I'm angry about this issue too. I'm tired of the Hispanics being made a scapegoat. I lived in New Mexico for about 13 years. My relations with the Hispanic people were very positive. I want them to have green cards, or, well, let me rephrase that. I want them to have work permits, and I want them to be able to work in this country without fear, as long as they have clean records and are willing to work, they should be given work permits. Social Security and other FICA withholding should be taken from their salaries so that when they go to the hospital, there'd be funds there. And after they've been here a while and worked and have met the requirements, learning English, they should be able to apply for citizenship. I have a lot more to say on this subject if you get me going, and that is that we stole Southwest from Mexico. And if we're going to send these people back to Mexico, we need to draw the border between Texas and Oklahoma. That's where the border is.
Mr. Buchanan?
We'll start with Mr. Hill with this one. You touched on some aspects of this issue in your earlier answers, but how would you address the budget deficit and attempt to eliminate it over the years?
The deficit, the current budget is about $3.8 trillion, and there's about $2.5 trillion coming in, projected. So that leaves us about $1.3 trillion shortfall. And and right now corporations are paying about $250 billion. If we multiply that by a factor of 3 to 4, we'll make up half the deficit immediately. And if we can't, and you say, well, we can't just pass income tax reform overnight. Well, I tell you what we can do. We can put tariffs on these offshore companies that are equal to the income tax that they should be paying, and we can do that immediately. Richard Nixon did it in the early 1970s without any input from Congress. He did it, and we can do it, and we can put tariffs on those companies and make them pay their fair share. Second thing, we got to stop these wars. The wars are taking, they say 110, 130 billion. It's more like 200 to 250 billion from our income every year, from our budget. The war spending is the very worst spending you could spend. You buy a bomb and it's not worth anything to anybody until you blow somebody up, and then you have to buy another one. You build a bridge in Afghanistan and we let our bridges over here go to pot. The money that we spend in this country that we could be spending in this country would rebuild our infrastructure, would put our people to work, and would stop this outflow. So have to watch this time thing here. We have about. I envision corporations paying a total of between $800 and $900 billion in taxes instead of $250. I envision stopping the wars, $200 billion minimum. And there are several other loopholes that I will identify that I want closed, and removing the cap, as Cecil pointed out, on Social Security is another one. We can make this work, and we don't have to be draconian about it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm inclined to agree largely with what Mr. Hill said in this case. Unlike our opponent, who's a Blue Dog Democrat, and if you don't know about the Blue Dogs, you ought to look them up on Google. In addition to raising taxes on corporations and making sure that the wealthy pay at least their fair share, an equal share, it's ridiculous that Mitt Romney pays 13%, while a middle-class person pays 30, 35. He should be embarrassed to run for president stashing his money in the Cayman Islands. I would like to see a financial transactions tax, which would help significantly. That's a tiny tax on every stock, bond, futures trade, like 0.25%. It wouldn't affect people who buy stocks and hold them for years, for an investment, for college, for retirement. But it would affect the people who make 100 trades a minute and treat Wall Street like a casino, basically. So I think that's another way to gain some taxes. However, I'm not nearly as concerned about the deficit as Mr. Hill is. We've often run deficits in the past, typically coming out of bad times, the Great Depression, World War II. Going all the way back, we founded this country in something of a hurry in order to borrow money from Europe to fight the British. We've often borrowed to do things we need to do. And right now, 10-year Treasury bonds are paying about 2%. 10-year bonds in 2002 were paying 6%. So when we borrow at 2% to pay off 10-year-old bonds, we're actually saving the government money. And that's part of the reason why the deficit has come down during the Obama administration. The Republicans claim it's gone up and up. It has not gone up. What he did initially was put the wars on the books, which the Bush administration run them off the books entirely. And then after accounting for that, the deficit has actually begun to be reduced. I remember the Clinton administration managed to provide pretty good social services in this country and cut the deficit.
Yes, I'd like to say just one thing. I am not crazy about the deficit. I mean, I'm not a right-winger on this. And you should know that of the $15.3 trillion deficit that exists now, more than $5 trillion is being held by the Federal Reserve. Well, what does that mean? What that means is that the Federal Reserve has issued $5 trillion for which there's not a thing to back it up. And inflation did not go through the roof. So I would have the Federal Reserve hold a preponderance of our debt, and I would set the interest paid by the federal government for the money it borrows to 3/4 1%, because that's what the banks pay the Federal Reserve for borrowing money from them. I would also set student loans to the same rate. That ought to go over well here, okay? But right now we've got, the students are buried in debt. They have more debt than the total national credit card debt.
Please expand on that and discuss the threat that is to this nation's future.
I agree 100%. What we've been doing is we have been cutting in the wrong areas. Okay, we fund wars and cut education, and that's stupid. There's no other word for it. It's stupid. All right, we should be funding education and cutting wars. This is not going to happen. And as Cecil alluded to, how much time do I have here? A minute or so?
That was a follow-up you had to.
That's not going to happen under the current Congress that we have. And the reason I can't contribute to the hunger thing that Cecil pointed out, because I don't have any money, all right? But what we have here is a Congress that is being bought and paid for by special interest. Heath Schuler took in $1.2 million last year alone in contributions. I voted for him to get rid of the Roy Taylor kind of image, and Schuler's gone up there and doing the same thing. He's taken an average of $1 million a year. Now, do you really believe that when the health care bill comes up, that he's not going to be influenced by the $148,000 he took from the insurance companies? This has to stop. So, and as Cecil was saying, he's pledged not to take money from these guys. Well, if you heard my opening speech, you can't think that I'm a supporter of corporations, all right? And so this has to stop. The only way it's going to stop is that we elect people who are pledging not to take these handouts because there are hooks in them. We know it, and you and I are at fault because we listen to this nonsense on TV ads. I'm not throwing barbs at the TV station. They come out and they hit everything except the real issues. Sorry.
Student loans. Student loans. How do we get that monkey off people's money?
Yes, he gets to say something else.
Yeah.
He gets,
Would you repeat the question? I actually kind of lost track of that.
How do we get the student loan monkey off of this generation's back?
Okay. I've heard it offered that we actually, with the kind of bailouts we've been doing in the last few years, starting with the Bush administration, there would be some rationality in simply a day of forgiveness and just wiping out student debt. It marks down in the same way that they're marking down mortgages. I don't know if that's totally feasible, but the mortgage companies are marking down the value of houses. They're making deals with homeowners, writing them down and taking them as a loss. Why is a loss on a house more important than taking a loss on a student? We need our students to have a fresh start when they get out of school. In the broader sense, what I've advocated, you can find on my website, I think that this nation, like any other industrial nation in the world, should offer free education from pre-K through 4 years of college at public colleges. There's no reason we can't afford to do that. There's a lot of reasons we can't afford not to do that. countries across Europe, and I know Mitt Romney will kick me for saying that, but countries across Europe do provide education through 4 years. And an educated workforce is hugely important. I agree with Tom. Let's end the wars. Let's start sending people to college instead of sending them to Afghanistan. So that's how I approach it, I guess, in the broad sense.
Could I add one thing to that?
Well,
There, on this mortgage write-down, it's woefully inadequate. And we need to fix that because the government has taken receivership of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. We can use that ownership of those quasi-governmental agencies to force those mortgages to be written down to market value. And once that happens in a given neighborhood, the private mortgages will be forced to follow because they'll be out of step with the market value. We need to do that. A lot of these student loans are held by private entities, and so that won't quite work the same way, but it will work to some degree because the ones the government has insured, we can force those down to 0.75%, which is what the banks are paying. And then if they can't, if the holders of those mortgages won't write them down, we'll print up the money and pay them off and let students repay at 0.75%.
I'd like to go to an issue that you both touched on earlier, but a little more direct question. Do you support the constitutional amendment banning gay marriage, and why or why not? Whichever one would like to go first.
Cecil?
Okay, I'll step in. As I stated briefly earlier, I am utterly opposed to Amendment 1. I think it's wrong on many levels. In fact, frankly, I'm surprised so many conservatives support it, because messing with the Constitution is an extremely stupid and expensive idea. It's going to spin lawsuits out for years afterwards. The way the amendment was written is so broad that it's going to affect not only same-sex unions, but which are already illegal in this state. It's going to affect common law marriages. It will affect custodial rights. It may affect elderly couples who've chosen to live together because of financial reasons. There's all kinds of, and then it'll spin off. Asheville is one of 5 cities in the state, which I'm proud to say provide domestic partner benefits to our same-sex employees who establish that they're an established couple, and we have rules for that. It's a really bad move for jobs in this state. Forward-looking companies across the country are providing domestic partner benefits, and this would ban the provision of domestic partner benefits. They aren't going to want to come to this state. High-tech companies want smart young people coming, and the wave of the future is that same-sex marriage is happening. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when now, state by state by state. And I think that the government, honestly, should step away from love. We can't dictate who loves who. None of us can dictate who loves who in our own relationships, And for the government to step in there makes absolutely no sense to me. Thank you.
31 states have provisions in their constitutions that prohibit that do not recognize same-sex marriages as legal marriages. I will support Amendment Number 1, and I don't care if it's popular here or not. I will support it because my values are not geared toward the couple, they're geared toward children. I think that every child is entitled to have a mother and a father, and not my 2 mommies and my 2 daddies. And if people in this country want to live together as homosexual relationship, they can do that. They can form whatever type of civil contract they want, but don't ask the state to recognize it as a legal marriage. That's where I draw the line. Those are my values, that's where I stand, and you can call me archaic or whatever you want, but I'm opposed to, I in fact have a niece who is in a same-sex marriage. And it was a choice of hers. It was not, I think that in many cases that the people in these unions have a genetic problem. I'll just tell you the straight up. I think that is the problem in most cases. It's not the problem in all cases, but they have a genetic problem. Those that have a genetic problem, I sympathize with them, and if they want to have sex change operations, I support that. But as far as having homosexuals live together and say, oh, that's a legal marriage, and they can force adoption agencies that object to same-sex marriages, that enforce them to allow them to adopt children or else they take them to court. I'm opposed to it, okay? And I leave no, I'm not speaking softly on this issue. That's where I stand.
I'd like to rebut. Here you're seeing one of the very, very clear differences between two candidates. And in fact, it's interesting that my reasoning about the Amendment 1 is exactly opposite concerning children. Protection of children is one of the reasons we need to allow same-sex marriage. Many people come into marriages or into same-sex relationships after failed heterosexual relationships. They already have children. I know a number of people who've raised children together over the years. The government's interest in marriage is who owns what, who owes what, and who gets what. And when a couple has lived together for 30 years, raised children who've grown up and have children of their own and everything, and they die, marriage laws are part of the way that property is distributed. Marriage laws are part of how they decide who controls the children, the children's welfare if there's a divorce. It's actually a very conservative thing. That's why I said earlier, marriage is conservative.
Short rebuttal. My estate, which is very paltry, is not going to be controlled by marriage laws, okay? It's going to be controlled by actually the legal work that I've prepared, and homosexuals can do the same. And if what is really the issue here is that homosexuality is the most abnormal situation I can imagine. No! If we want to talk about, that's all right, you have your opinion, dear. If you want to talk about normal and abnormal, homosexuality is abnormal. Now, the homosexuals want us to stamp it as normal. They greatly desire that, and marriage is one of those. Marriage is one of those ways, and so I understand that. But I'm opposed to it, and not just out of religious reasons. I believe it is not in the best interest of society as a whole, and I oppose it.
Mrs. Enlow?
Thank you. This is to both of you, please, and I'll start with Mr. Bothwell. The delivery of mental health services has undergone drastic changes in North Carolina during the past decade, and many believe that those have not been good changes. What is the federal government's role in the delivery of mental health services?
It seems to me, first of all, I have to agree that we've had a travesty here in what's happened to our mental health system here. It's kind of strange. As a reporter some years ago, I covered the changeover, and it turned out that the person who was hired here, who wrecked the North Carolina state mental health system, came here from wrecking the Michigan mental health care system, did the same thing there. I'm not sure why we hired him. Through my jail ministry, through my church, I've seen what's happened in the jails. A lot of the people I meet with when I go into the jail every month are there because of mental health issues. They don't belong there for anything serious that they've done wrong. The federal government, it seems to me, Medicare should certainly cover mental health issues. And it seems to me that the federal government might be empowered to impose some kind of standards so that states don't fall into the kind of hole that we've fallen into. But I'm not real clear on how much power the Fed would have to do that.
I'm not sure I understand your question, ma'am. As I understand it, you want me to ask what is the role of federal government in providing for mental health facilities?
Delivery services, yes.
And what was the last word?
For the delivery of mental health services.
What? The
Delivery of mental health services.
Okay.
Doctors and psychiatrists.
I would suspect that the majority in this state is being supported by Medicaid. I'm not. I don't know that to be true, but I would suspect that it's occurring. Bipolar disorders, for example, are occurring a lot in younger generations, and they're certainly not on Medicare. They're on, and if they get support, it's Medicaid. So to me, it's a matter of paying those bills. Now, I'm not an expert in mental health. Okay, maybe I will be by the time this campaign is over. But I can tell you that the issue is, as far as I can tell, is support of Medicaid, and we have to come up with that money. I do object to people who, and we had this with the Henderson County Sheriff, he claimed that he was bipolar after he had a couple of affairs with his deputies, and so he went out on retirement. Now, I fought that as hard as I could, and in fact, I led the effort to oust him, and he claimed bipolar disorder, and I still believe that that was a political decision there. That his retirement was allowing him to retire was a way of getting him out of office. But what I resent are people who don't have bipolar. I have a good friend who's truly bipolar, and he has to stay on his medication, and I understand what that disease is, and what offends me is when people use mental health, mental problems as an excuse for improper conduct and for other reasons, or perhaps to avoid responsibilities and work. As far as the federal government's role, we have to support that under Medicaid, but we need state panels to verify that the mentally ill are true mentally ill and not faking it, and we're doing a poor job of that.
Mr. Lanier?
This is for both candidates, with Mr. Hill first. Recently, former Republican presidential candidate Pat Robertson said we had lost or were losing the war on drugs and believe we should start treating drugs the same way we treat alcohol. Do you believe we've either won or lost that war, or what should we do differently?
Pat Robertson was exactly right. We need to legalize marijuana. There's no question of that. And if the people who are against that were willing to give up their liquor bottles, then okay, I'll listen to them. But until they do, in fact, I know personally some people who use marijuana, and generally when they use marijuana, they're, hey, I'm okay, you okay? And a lot of guys when they get drunk, they want to fight, okay? So to me, marijuana is a lot less detrimental to society. Now I'm not advocating use of marijuana for folks, okay? I'm not saying that. I'm just saying this is a free country, and if you want to drink or use marijuana, I see no problem with it. The other thing I'm really angry about here, I guess I'm coming across an angry guy, but you go to the courthouse sometime on Monday morning when they're calling court. The vast majority of the cases that are being called are possession of marijuana. The vast majority. We've got our jails filled with kids and young adults who are using marijuana. And so the sheriff's department makes a lot of collateral by arresting these people, and they bring them in, and it is burdening. Talk to an attorney who represents people arrested for drug use on a regular basis, and you'll get the message. And the average person doesn't realize this. We can send people to college cheaper than we can incarcerate them. And we're putting them in there for if we're going to do anything with habitual drug users, I want work camps for them, not jail. I don't know if I've covered all the things, but I support legalizing marijuana in case you didn't understand that.
I agree with Tom up to, but beyond agreeing with him, I have a little stronger case to make. I think that the drug war has been a painful experience for America, and we have lost it. Americans who want to use different sorts of drugs vote with their dollars constantly. We're shipping billions of dollars of cash over the border, unaccounted for. We're filling our prisons with people, and although a lot of them are simply marijuana users, a lot of them are people who commit property crimes to support expensive habits. And those habits are expensive because the drugs are illegal. Nobody's forming gangs around cigarettes these days. Nobody's forming gangs around alcohol these days. The gangs are completely a byproduct of the war on drugs. The pharmaceutical companies are dead set against it. They want to prescribe something to change your mood and not have you go buy it on the street corner. I don't think that it should be on the street corner, and neither am I advocating drug use. But I think we've found ways to regulate alcohol use and alcohol sale. We've found ways to regulate tobacco sale. And in fact, through education, we've reduced tobacco use in this country. Through education, we've reduced alcohol use since the 1800s anyway. I don't know if we reduced it lately. We could do the same thing. We could find a way maybe to register users, maybe through a type of ABC store. I don't know the exact answer, but we are burning through money, we're burning through families, we're putting people in, non-white men mostly, as a percentage. A much higher percentage of non-white men are in prison than white. And breaking up their families, breaking up their neighborhoods. And then when these people get out of jail, I know the people I meet in my jail ministry, a lot of them say, boy, I'm going straight this time, about a week after I get out, but first I'm going to make some money. That's the reality.
Thank you. I would say there's not a lot of difference between our positions. I hope that comes across. I just believe that, I too believe that the war on drugs is lost. I'm offended with the fact that people who claim to be white collar lawyers, other people claim to be Christian, they're the ones buying this cocaine, and it's coming across the border. And so if we, and yet they stand up and try to condemn the drug users, and I really resent that. I don't know how to stop it other than legalizing drugs that are not, I certainly would not legalize LSD, would not legalize crystal meth. And so those people are going to have to go back to jail or to work counts one, but the marijuana I definitely prefer legalization.
A 15-second explanation here. Also, crystal meth is not, the reason crystal meth has spread so widely is because of the war on drugs. It's something that can be made fairly cheaply locally. The people who use that kind of a stimulant would probably rather use some of the natural stimulants that people have used for millions of years. And so we've created the crystal meth problem also with the war on drugs. And I agree, I don't think it's a good, I don't know, we'd have to do something with that. At least suppress the ingredients like we're doing now.
Follow-up. Mr. Buchanan?
Mr. Bothwell, you've mentioned your prison ministry a couple of times, and you mentioned religious faith. And we live in an era where a lot of politicians seem like they want to be preachers, and a lot of preachers seem like they want to be politicians. What is the proper role of faith in public service? And I'll start with you, Cecil.
Okay. I believe expressly in the separation of church and state, which was implemented in our Constitution through the work of the Baptists in the South, actually, who wanted to protect their churches from the Episcopals and other religions in New England, who they were afraid might impose a church like the Church of England, which we just escaped from. So I believe that serves everyone well. It protects your church from the government. It protects your faith from being dictated to you by someone else. And I feel free to be an active member of my church as Tom is an active member of his church. Now, faith is what, in many ways, what guides us, or belief. And surely one's beliefs guide one's moral choices. And for instance, my basic moral choice is to follow the golden rule. It's guided me for all of my adult years. And to me, if our lawmaking emanates from the golden rule, it can't go too far wrong. We want to treat the people back home the way we'd like to be treated ourselves. We want to treat the people we work with in Washington like we want to be treated ourselves. We want to see that the laws that are fashioned are truly just to all people. So that's how I see belief playing out. But it shouldn't be, I'm uncomfortable with people who wear their belief on their sleeves. To me, you can tell what a person believes by how they behave, much better than by what they claim. Because, belief is one of those very odd little bugs. You really can never know what someone else believes. It's the easiest thing in the world to lie about. So I think words are nothing and actions are everything.
My position is not far from Cecil's. I think religious leaders should stay out of politics. People like Jerry Falwell and we recently had Franklin Graham going up to make a comment about Obama's religion. That was wrong, plain wrong. But at least Franklin Graham had the decency to apologize and say he shouldn't have said that. Now, what we have is a lot of rabid evangelicals who can't separate, their minds can't separate religion from politics. Now we had and I'll give you a personal example. We had the Mud Creek Baptist Church over here in Henderson County, not far from where I live. The minister welcomed a tour bus coming through from, sponsored by, when you look at the organization, it was sponsored by the Koch brothers and by, I forget the other organization, which really is, denies global warming. Well, they came through and he welcomed them and, Christian values, and then they asked him about candidates, and he talked about how he really liked what and the Reverend is not a bad fellow, okay? But he talked about how he really liked Mark Meadows. Boy, I wrote him a letter and told him to keep his nose out of politics. I said, I sing in the choir at the church in Hendersonville, and I've sung in your choir, and I'm offended by and I said, I hope you have the courtesy to come out and apologize, and I mentioned Franklin Graham's apology, but he never responded to my letter. Maybe I'll write him another one.
This question is to Mr. Bothwell only. Mr. Bothwell, when you were elected to Asheville City Council, a formal challenge was made as to your right to be seated because you had stated and had written that you were an atheist, one who does not believe God exists. And of course, North Carolina's Constitution, for whatever reason, prohibits anyone from holding office who does not believe in God, but the federal Constitution trumps that. You published at the time of the challenge that you prefer to think of yourself as a post-theist, one who believes that God belongs to a stage of human development now past. And that definition comes from Wikipedia. You have said that you don't think this issue is relevant, but there are voters out there who do believe that it is. How will your personal philosophy affect your decision-making process?
That's a good question. First of all, I'd like to correct something there. I had never self-labeled as an atheist before I was labeled as an atheist by the Republicans in Asheville. They interpreted something I had written to suggest that I said it, but I never said that. And then once that story went viral, and it did, it went global, there were hundreds of stories around the world, in fact, about that because of the challenge, the constitutional challenge, which amounted to nothing. Once you're labeled, you're labeled. And after that, I haven't resisted it. My own personal, I'd never been asked by my church what to define myself as. I'm a member of the Unitarian Universalist Church, and we believe in the free exercise of reason, and that everyone finds their own path to truth. And they'd never asked how I defined myself. When the reporter first came to me, I came up with post-theist, and the reason for that term, and I'd never used that on myself either, but I grew up in a world, post-World War II, when most of the questions that have been presented by religion, with answers by religion, in the past had been pretty well answered. Where we came from, why the world is the way it is, the Big Bang, evolution, and so forth. And I felt like I didn't need to use a theistic explanation to answer any questions I had. It's not that there might not be a God. I don't think I can know that. So that's my position, is that in my life I haven't found a need for that explanation. And in the end, I don't think I can know. Maybe in the end we'll all know.
Thank you, sir.
I would request opportunity to speak on that. I regard Cecil as a good person, and I don't think his religion should be a political issue. The problem is the Republicans will make, as they already have, if he's a nominee, they'll make the strongest issue of that they possibly can. And I know that. I object to that, but I can't do anything about it. And I want to say that I personally, I'm a physicist. I have a doctorate degree in physics. I believe very much in God. There are a lot of people in my discipline who do not. But it's the song, when I gaze into the night sky and see the majesty and glory. I cannot believe that there's not a supreme power that has made any and everything around us. Those are my personal beliefs. I do not believe that that should be my criterion for being elected. It should not be the one for Cecil. And I respect his position, and I want to say that.
Short rebuttal. On the electability issue, they ran a smear campaign against me in Asheville. They sent out tens of thousands of letters we guessed people 50 and over as best we could figure out because of who we knew who received the letters. And I still won handily in defeating Carl Mumpower, who was who had been the Republican candidate for Congress here in 2008. Yeah, 2008. So I don't doubt that it can be overcome, especially if I challenge the people on the issues that they say they're going to support. And people who want to cut Medicare and cut Social Security and cut Medicaid and cut support for Planned Parenthood do not have family values, no matter what they tell you. And I will win this election in November.
Mr. Lanier?
This is for both candidates. I guess Mr. Hill. A few years ago, Secretary of State Clinton articulated Iran's right to continue with a peaceful nuclear energy program as long as it was conducted under the full supervision of the International Atomic Energy Agency. Do you agree with that position?
Let me answer it in a roundabout way. Leon Panetta, the Defense Secretary, said unequivocally that Iran does not have a nuclear weapons program capable of producing a nuclear weapon in the foreseeable future. I'm probably not quoting him exactly, but that was basically what he said. This whole thing with Iran is blown up. I lived, by the way, through the Jimmy Carter era when they seized the embassy and all that nonsense went down. And this entire thing is being blown up to justify another war in the Mideast. And that's what it's about. Don't kid yourself. And it's also being seized on by Wall Street interests to make money on, there's going to be a shortage of oil, okay? Most people don't have any clue about the oil reserves in the world and where they're coming from. And so I'm really, as far as nuclear energy for peace, how do you tell? And what gives us the moral right to say that we can have a nuclear weapon, but you can't, all right? Israel has a nuclear weapon. Yet they stole the nuclear material from us, okay? Now, I'm a big supporter of Israel because they're the only democracy in that region of the world. But we are in somewhat of a bind here trying to tell people who can and who can't have nuclear weapons. Now, if we're really excited about that issue, let's go over there and invade North Korea and destroy they have the capability, all right? But instead, it's Iran this. I'd like to point out the Iranians were the ones, the Persians, their predecessors, were the ones who allowed the Jews that were in captivity to go back to their homeland. They have a history of being a moderate people, and so I think right now, unfortunately, they've got another one of these ayatollahs in charge who sorry.
I really substantially agree with Tom on that issue. In fact, the immediate ex-chief of the Israelis Mossad, their security organization, did a rather lengthy interview, and I think it was in the New York Times the other morning that I read, in which he said he doesn't think there's anything to fear even if Iran gets a nuclear weapon. He said that people have blown them up into some kind of bogeyman, and in fact, they're quite rational leaders there. You hear from some of the less rational leaders in the news and all, but those countries know that launching a nuclear strike on Israel would be suicidal. I mean, it's the same sort of standoff there's between India and Pakistan right now. They're not going to nuke each other. And this cooked up fear that we're being presented is entirely about driving up oil prices and possibly getting us embroiled in another war in the Mideast. I tend to think it has more to do with pushing up oil prices to get Obama out of office right now. But I say don't worry about Iran. Keep an eye on them, sure.
Just as a point of clarification, would the same concepts that you've espoused apply to other countries that, might have nuclear capabilities in the future? Would you foresee them allowing to go ahead with their programs if they were supervised?
I'm sorry, I don't really understand the question.
Well, Iran is the topic right now, but in 2 or 3 years there may be another country that's in a similar situation that's trying to develop nuclear power. Would you have any objections to a country go ahead and following that path, or should they also be supervised by the IAEA?
I think we should definitely discourage the development of nuclear weapons. There is a big difference, which average John Q. public does not understand. There's a big difference between weapons production for nuclear energy and commercial power. A big difference. And in fact, we still have secret the methods by which we achieve implosion of the trigger mechanism, it's called, the materials that we put in there and how we make that work. And so a lot of these countries could, in theory, develop a nuclear capability, nuclear weapon capability, but really probably can't in a practical sense. I'm not sure Iran can. And it depends on, in most cases, they're stealing the technology from us, and or they're buying it, whichever works best for them. I'll give you an example. The Russians and we were in a competition to put a man on the moon, and the Russians could not build what's called a J2. How much time do I have here? Could not build a liquid hydrogen upper stage. They didn't have that capability. So they built this huge booster. Now the Apollo booster looks big to us, and it is big, okay? But it could never have sent the man to the moon without that liquid hydrogen upper stage, which is with this J2 engine. The Soviets didn't have it. They kept trying to build these massive boosters. The thing blew up on the ground, and they never got a man to the moon. So when you talk about these programs in theory, and you talk about the practical aspects, the engineering that has to be done, they're vastly different capabilities.
I would go a little further, and it's one of the other clear differences between Mr. Hill and myself. I am not a believer in nuclear energy. We were told in my childhood that it would soon be too cheap to meter, and now it's actually too expensive for any private business to build. No company would do it without absolute guarantees from the federal government of total insurance for any possible accident. We saw what just happened in Japan, an accident that couldn't have happened. We saw what happened in Chernobyl, an accident that couldn't have happened. We haven't solved the waste problem. Even recycling the waste only reduces it by about 10%. We don't have a good way to transport it. Transport of nuclear material is extremely dangerous on our highways. I think that the way to build our way out of that and to lead the world in not needing nuclear reactors, except for maybe medical and experimental, I mean, I'm not against science, but we can lead the way out by funding green energy programs that can find better ways to produce power for our world.
I think we are reaching the end of our time.
Could I have just 1 minute to respond, if you please?
Just 1 minute.
Okay. It was absolutely ridiculous for the Japanese to build 5 nuclear reactors side by side in a known tsunami path. It was absurd. And we have over 100 nuclear reactors in this country. Now, I'm not saying, hey, let's all go nuclear and light up, okay? The fact of the matter is that the people are demanding this electricity. You want electric cars, okay? Where are you going to get the electricity? Oh, we get it from solar. The sun goes down. The wind stops blowing, okay? We maxed out on hydroelectric, all right? And so in Chernobyl, the Russians were never on our level insofar as developing nuclear capability. It was a stupid accident. We had a 3 Mile Island accident, and not 1 gram of radioactivity escaped to the atmosphere. So There's nuclear and there's nuclear. And no, I don't want to give a free pass to people to go out there, but at the same time, we are going to use it because it's there.
I think we're about to run a little over. I'd like to thank the panelists for their questions, the candidates for their responses. Because of the time factor, I'll ask each of you to limit your closing comments to 2 minutes. Mr. Bockwell, you go first.
Okay. Thank you, all of you, for being out here this evening. I would love to come out and shake hands with you afterwards, but I have to make a phone call at 9 p.m. I'm up for endorsement by the Progressive Democrats of America. I've already been endorsed by the state Progressive Democrats chapter, and I believe I'm going to get the national endorsement tonight. I've also been won a vote last night, a nationwide poll with Democracy for America that put me in first nationwide for going to Netroots Nation in June. I've been endorsed by Blue America, which is not a Blue Dog thing at all. It's a progressive group that has been channeling funding my way. I've been endorsed by Enlighten the Vote. I have got over 1,200 volunteers working with this campaign. It is a true grassroots campaign. I am accountable to 1,200 volunteers and well over 1,000 donors at this point. Tom, you should find some donors. You can build a campaign on $5 at a time. We need to change the way work in Washington is done. The only way to change it is to get the money out of politics, and I pledge to get the money out of politics. Candidates will tell you, oh, we can't really reform campaigns. You know, we tried McCain-Feingold, and the court shot it down with Citizens United. The truth of the matter is, any candidate can reform campaigns. You reform your own, and that will spread. So that's what I plan to do. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being here tonight. And remember to vote and take a friend to vote. Whoever you vote for, vote. Thank you.
Mr. Hill?
At this time, I'll finish my opening statement. I spoke so slowly that I couldn't finish it. So I want to say a few words about who I am. I grew up on an apple farm in East Flat Rock, went to Hendersonville High School, obtained a bachelor's degree from Wake Forest, and a doctorate degree in physics from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I say this not to boast, but to emphasize that I am a believer in education. It has been the key to my life, and it should be the key to the younger generation that's coming along now. During my career, I was an aerospace scientist. I performed range support for moon launches. I modeled satellite environments, but I mostly concentrated on cost versus performance of military systems. I know how those matters work. I know where the bodies are buried insofar as the military systems are concerned. I was a member of the team that selected the initial Star Wars contracts, and I participated, boy, time flies when you're having fun, and I participated in IG evaluation for Tactical Air Force while I lived in Europe for 5 years. I've been over there. I know how to live in Europe, and I critique military systems. That's not a popular occupation, but I'm committed to honesty and integrity in government. I will criticize the Democrats. And so people hit me, oh, don't, the Republicans do enough of that. No, where we fail, we have to be honest. Got 30 seconds. I want to ask you, what would you prefer in a candidate? Do you want to send somebody back to Washington to fix this mess that we have up there with the corporations buying us out by sending back someone who is like Heath Schuler or his protege who's going to do the same thing? If that's what you want, then vote that way. If you want somebody who's going up there with a clean slate and as of right now no money, then vote for me. And if anybody in the audience likes anything I said and is willing to support me, I would appreciate it. Thank you for your time. Thank you.
This concludes tonight's debate between Cecil Bockwell and Tom Hill. I'd like to thank members of the panel. I'd also like to thank all of you for coming. We have done this in the hopes that you can make a more informed decision on May 8th in the North Carolina primary and in the November general election. We'd like to thank Brevard College, particularly the Brevard College Debate Society and Young Politicians of America for hosting this event, and to remind you that this is the first of 2 debates sponsored by these organizations on the Brevard College campus. Monday evening, my colleague, News 13's Frank Faboni, will assume the role of lead moderator for the debate among the 8 Republican candidates. Mr. Buchanan and Mr. Lanier will be joined by Mr. Lee Goldman of the Hendersonville Times-News as the panelists, and that 90-minute debate, once again, will begin at 7:30. Thank you, members of the audience, for participating in this event. By attending tonight's debate, you are demonstrating what is best in our democracy, an active and informed citizenry with the power to make choices for the common good. Thank you and good evening.
I was like, who wrote that?